Hi, I'm Ash and welcome to this video looking at the basic foot switch. In this video we will look at the first foot switch to learn, which is switching from toe side back to heel side. Before we get into the technique, I want to talk a little bit about setting up your equipment for success and also talk a little bit about conditions for practicing foot switching. One of the things about foot switching is that the later you leave it to learn, the more chance there is that you will be on more intermediate rather than beginner foils. I recommend learning this before you switch from beginner foils onto something more intermediate orientated. The reason for this is that a beginner foil tends to have a very big and stable rear stabiliser. These stabilisers are typically very pitch and roll stable and don't react very quickly to weight changes. Your beginner foils will also typically have a longer fuselage, which is also generally more pitch stable. The foot switch involves moving your feet around on the board. The less the board reacts to this, then the more chance you have of successfully switching your feet. Intermediate foil setups will typically have much smaller foils, smaller rear stabilisers, and in general be far more reactive to weight changes, which makes learning to switch feet using them much more difficult. However, don't worry if you have moved on from your beginner foils and are learning to foot switch on intermediate gear. There are things you can do to help make it easier, and I'll guide you through that. First, we just need to look at the process of the foot switch and what weight moves where, and then I explain how we counter this with the setup of the foil to make the foot switch easier. In this first clip, what we can see is that the foot switch involves the back foot coming forwards to the front of the board, so we now have all of our weight towards the nose of the board. We then move our old front foot back to become our new rear foot and can then rebalance our weight evenly. The clear issue here is that weight is all going forwards first, so the board is going to nosedive and we need to counter that effect in some way. So let's return to our setup and talk about how we do that. As I already stated, one way we can counter this is to use an old beginner stabiliser, so the board is very stable and slow to react to the weight change. We also want to do some other things to help us. The first of those is increasing our front foot pressure when in normal flight. By increasing the front foot pressure, we make the board more tolerant to us weighting the nose more heavily, and it will be less keen to nosedive. We can create this extra front foot pressure in two different ways. We can move the mast forward a couple of centimetres in the mast track, which will increase the front foot pressure. We can also shim our tail stabiliser to raise the leading edge of the stabiliser so that it generates more lift and therefore creates more front foot pressure. A 1 degree shim will in most cases be enough. Shimming the tail stabiliser is the best methodology if you are on an intermediate foil, as this will not only increase front foot pressure but also make the foil more pitch stable and a little bit slower. Our overall goal is to make the board much more front foot heavy to ride, just while we are learning to do our initial foot switches. In general, your first foot switches will be slow, which means too much weight is on the front of the board for too long, and this leads to a nosedive and falling off. This covers board setup. Now for sea conditions, or lake conditions if you're on inland lakes, it actually helps if there is some gentle swell, as we can use this as natural lift whilst we do our foot switch. In effect, we do the foot switch as we hit a swell bump, and the natural lift from that swell holds the nose of the board up for us while we do the foot switch, and so we end up with much less nosedive due to our weight being on the front of the board. In flat water, we have to recreate this effect ourselves by pitching the foil up slightly so we are flying upwards slightly. Then we do the foot switch, which counters this action and flies the nose back down again. It is harder to do the action to bump the board up and then switch than it is to just sail into a bump and have it happen naturally. So doing it with swirl bumps is the preferred way to learn. Lastly, if possible, do your first foot switches barefoot. It's much easier to understand where your feet are on the board if you are directly in contact with the board rather than through a thick-soled boot. Sorry for the long introduction, but if we're aiming for quick success, then being properly prepared makes this much more likely. So with all that done, let's look at the technique in detail. In this video, you will note that there are foot swaps both with and without foot straps. This first one is without straps. You can learn foot swaps without using front straps, but what I would say is that having front straps can give you a good target for your first foot movement and helps with getting the placement right. Without straps, you can overshoot or get the first foot movement wrong, and this leads to an instant nosedive and possible crash. In this example, the sea was relatively flat and there were not many good bumps to use for natural lift. I do use a bump in this foot swap, but unfortunately the GoPro lens has flattened it, so you can't see it very easily. The basics are that I'm waiting for a swell bump to start to lift the foil, which is happening now. Circled is the bump I'm going to do the swap on, and you can see the second swell line immediately behind it. As soon as I'm expecting that lift in the foil to occur, I angle the wing up into the wind. I'm doing this to make the wing take my weight. I want as little weight on the board for the swap as possible, and so I use the wing to make myself lighter. As soon as the wing has my weight, I perform the first movement of my back foot to the front position alongside my other front foot. This swap I do deliberately slowly to show that the wing actually has my weight for a short period. I can actually sail with both feet at the front for a short period, supported by the wing and also the rise of the foil from the lift in the swell bump we just ran onto. I then move my old front foot backwards and return the wing to the power position to pump and regain some speed and get the foil some speed to provide lift. We touched down very briefly, but mostly due to the second swell bump I highlighted earlier passing under the board. After the initial big foot movement, it is fine to make any micro adjustments in your feet to get comfortable before settling in and sailing away in your normal stance. So let's just look at that again at full speed. As with slow motion it looks very sedate, but in real life it actually happens pretty quickly. Okay, for this next example we'll be doing the foot switch going in the opposite direction. In this example we have some much stronger swirl bumps to help us, and I'm sighting this coming bump to do my switch. This is a bigger wave than the previous example, and so I'll need to do less with the wing to hold my weight. I only do a small initial movement of both feet to get the switch done, and the wing is once again angled a bit up into the wind to help me lighten the board while I make a second micro adjustment to get my feet exactly where I want them. This switch is in boots and with front straps, but make no mistake that wearing boots makes doing the switch much less intuitive. For this last example, I use a little bump up of the board to get it flying upwards, plus a swell bump, and an angling of the wing to take my weight in order to make the switch. So 3 separate actions in support of the switch, plus the switch itself. Before showing the bump up of the board, I just want to talk about this briefly. The idea of the bump up of the board is that you fly low over the water and then put a little pressure into the back foot just before the foot switch. This puts your board on an upward trajectory, giving you support to apply weight to the nose of the board and it not immediately nosedive as a result. The key here is not to go too strong with this back foot pressure, as you can just put yourself straight into a foil breach if you move the back foot forward too late. The other thing I would say is this is the more advanced technique. There is more to think about and get right than just timing your foot switch as you ride up a swell line. So I'd highly recommend just using swell bumps to do your initial foot swaps, before moving on to flatter water and trying to do them with a bump up from the back foot. In this example, the swell bump we're going to use is here, and it's not a particularly big bump, so this is why I'm also using a bump up from the back foot. You will barely notice it in the video, but you'll see a small bend of my knees as I push a little extra weight onto the back foot, and you'll see the nose of the board immediately start to rise. I have stopped it here as you can see the results of the 3 actions I made to make this foot swap possible. Firstly, the board is angled on an upward trajectory from the back foot pressure just as I approached the swell bump. I'm also now higher on the mast as the upward angle and the lift from that passing swell line has lifted me up on the foil. Lastly, you can see I've angled the wing up into the wind to take my weight. With the wing in this position, you can pull in the backhand and lift yourself up slightly or unweight the board. It only works briefly, but it's enough to make the foot swap. I have both feet on the front of the board at this point, but you can see that all 3 of these actions have left me in a situation where the board itself is not nosediving but actually still lifting. The upward trajectory and putting the wing into the wind does slow you down, so immediately after the foot swap you need to repower and pump a little as well as level off the board to regain speed. One crucial thing to note is that foot swaps are best done with a reasonable amount of speed. Do not slow down to make your foot swaps, as this reduces the lift from your foil and makes the foot swap much harder. So to tie things up, we will just watch that last swap at full speed. Okay, that's everything for this foot swap video. If you like my content and you haven't subscribed, then please do so, and I'll see you on the next video.